So welcome once again to another episode of Scott Talks Law. So in this episode, I will be talking about environment law, and we're going to do a revision and just going to talk about the important things in this unit. So we're going to start with multilateral environmental agreements, the MEA. So multilateral environmental agreements, these agreements that are entered into by states, and these are agreements that are legally binding upon the states which enter into those agreements. So these agreements can be referred to, they can have different names like treaties, they can be called conventions, they can be called agreements, they can be called policies. But even though they have different names, they are still binding. The important thing to know about them, these are binding agreements. In as far as they may be containing different names, they are just binding agreements upon states that enter into those agreements. So these multilateral environmental agreements are governed by some certain principles, and they can also be called protocols. So they are based on some certain principles like state sovereignty over natural resources, and states have sovereignty over the natural resources in their territory, the principle of right to development, and the principle of sustainable development that ensures that the current generation needs are met without interfering or hampering with the needs of the future generation, and is based on some 3 elements, like generational equity, among others. And we also have the principle of common heritage, and this one just endeavors to protect the culture, things like culture, so that to ensure that the coming generation is not interfered with. Intergenerational, that is common heritage. So the 5th one, the principle of common concern for humankind. And during this multilateral agreement, the concern here is of humankind and the environment. So the human beings must be taken into consideration through the guidance of that principle and the environment. And the prohibition to cause transboundary harm. So it's also another principle that transboundary harm should it be caused. And the principle of intergenerational equity and the minimize impact on the future generation. So intergenerational equity is the principle that ensures that there is a minimal impact on the future generation. We also have the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, and this principle endeavors that the protection of the environment is a responsibility of all nations, but we need to take into account the developing countries. So all nations must take part in the protection of environment, but with differentiated responsibility. The developing country cannot have the same responsibility with the developed countries. The developed countries must have more responsibility towards the environment as compared to, because of their financial stability. So we also have the principle of prevention, precautionary principle of taking precaution to reduce, minimize harm. We also have principle of notification, consultation, and cooperation in environmental aspects. We also have the principle of right to transparency and public participation. There need to be transparency in these multilateral agreements, and public participation is key. And we also have the principle of polluter pay, that whoever pollutes should be paid or be answerable for whichever pollution. We also have the principle of prior licensing and permits. And we also have the principle of prior informed consent. If you want to dispose these waste, you must give or notify whichever state that you intend to deposit the waste. We talked about transboundary deposition of toxics and hazardous substances. We also have the principle of emission standards, among other principles. So the main areas that are these transboundary agreements, multilateral agreement, the multilateral environmental agreement focuses on is the areas of diversity, conservation, and sustainable use. The second one is the area of land management. The third one is the area of water course. The fourth one is the area of marine environment and protection. The fifth one is the area of ozone layer protection. The sixth one is the area of climate change responsibility. The seventh one is the area of waste management. The eighth one is the area of chemical management. So those 8 areas form a key concern under multilateral environmental agreement. So looking at the land management, this agreement just aim to reduce desertification, biodiversity loss, and climate change, which are identified as greater challenges to sustainable development. So we also have the area of management of water course, and it applies to rivers and to freshwater resources and like rivers. So we also have the area of marine environment protection and protection. This ensures that there is protection of living resources in the marine environment and prevention of pollution from ships, and that is provided for by the MAPOL Convention. So we also have the area of climate change and responsibility. We also have the area of ozone layer protection. And under ozone layer protection, we have the MEA contains principles, commitment, institutions, and COPLA. So this is how the multilateral environmental agreements work. So they will come up with principles, they will come up with commitments, how they are going to be committed towards achieving some certain objectives. They will come up with some certain institutions that will work towards achieving them. They will come up with some compliance measures towards the achieving of those agreements. So under the ozone layer protection, we have got the Beijing Agreement of 1999, which introduced the Article 2F that sets out the schedule for hydrochlorofluorocarbon HCFCs. These have replaced the chlorofluorocarbon refrigerators. So globally, you know about global warming and the effects of global warming, the rising of seas and ocean tides, the loss of sea ice. So when the temperature increase that is resulted by global warming, so these agreements must be there to reduce, to curb global warming and to protect the ozone layer. So the effects of global warming also have the intense heat waves. So another one is the area of waste management, and this is just there to ensure that waste is managed well. We've got the Basel Convention of 1889, and the common objective is to protect human health and the environment. We also have the 1998 Rotterdam Convention on the prior informed consent procedures, provides for the procedure of prior informed consent and certain hazardous chemicals. We have got the chemical management as an area under the multilateral environmental agreement, and provides for mandatory commitments to reduce some certain chemicals that are listed there. We've got the Maramata Convention on Mercury that tries to reduce mercury and the effects of mercury, the effects of mercury. So Article 2 of the United Nations Framework on Climate Change, under climate change, we have got the Kyoto Protocol that determines specific emissions reduction and targets for developing countries. So this Kyoto Protocol determines some targets that are the reduction targets for developing countries, emission reduction targets. So there's some certain targets that are supposed to be met by developing countries in regards to emissions. We've got Article 2 of the UNFCCC that determines the objective of global climate change and the responsibility and the general goals and criteria for determining the time and how to achieve it. So those are areas, and you can look at other areas that I haven't touched on at your own free time. So the objectives of this multilateral now going to talk about the objectives and of these multilateral environmental agreements and challenges and importance and challenges. So the importance of these multilateral environmental agreements, the objective first of all is to strengthen environmental governance. So like you'll find that when these principles are there, when there is commitment to us achieving those principles, when there is compliance mechanisms that have been developed under those agreements, you will find that it is easier to ensure environmental governance. So another objective is that, and you will find that when that is done, the objective of strengthening environmental governance has been achieved. Another objective is to reduce environmental degradation. So we've got that area that talks about the reduction of chemicals, or chemical reduction. And chemicals and waste are there because they like lead to increase in environmental harm or damages. So you've got the provision on we've got that area that talks about management of water course. So when they protect water course, when they protect marine environment, when they protect the ozone layer, when they protect biodiversity and ensuring sustainable use of resources, when they protect under waste management and chemical management, that just ensures that there is a reduction of environmental degradation. Another objective is working towards encouraging sustainable development. And when they do all those things, when they talk on biodiversity conservation and sustainable use of resources, they just ensure that there is sustainable development. You've seen the principles. When that principle of sustainable development, which is a guiding factor in achieving their objectives. So you've got the advantages and disadvantages. The importance is that they ensure global cooperation, because the states will come together and work towards achieving environmental protection and agreements that will ensure that the environment is protected. There is legal framework. They establish legally binding instruments, binding commitments. So they establish legally binding commitments towards achieving environmental protection. First, protection of the environment, and they also ensure biodiversity conservation. We have the CBD Convention on Biodiversity that is there to ensure that there is biodiversity conservation, and this Convention on Biodiversity focuses on preserving the ecosystem and the species. We've got climate change mitigations as an advantage and as an importance, because we've got the Paris Agreement that aims to reduce greenhouse gases emission and limits global warming. So we also have the pollution control, and they also ensure pollution control, which is the Stockholm Convention, and on the protection of organisms to ensure there is no pollution. So those are four importance of this convention. Protection of pollution control, legal framework, they create legal binding commitments, they promote global cooperation, and they ensure biodiversity conservation, and they ensure climate change mitigation. So the challenges are like enforcement and compliance mechanism. Some agreements lack enforcement and compliance mechanisms. So not all of these agreements have the effective enforcement and compliance mechanism. Some of them lack enforcement and compliance mechanism. That poses a challenge to these multilateral environmental agreements, the MEA. We also have the challenge of political will and sovereignty. National interest is taken into national interest sometimes conflicts with the goals of achieving environmental protection. So political wills and sovereignty. National interests, the countries, like nations or states, wants to develop more than even, they don't want to think about environment matters. They just want to think about how they are going to promote industrialization, how they're going to ensure development of their own countries and create employment without thinking about the impact of the environment that these industries will cause, without looking at sustainable development. So that is also a challenge, and that is the challenge of political will and sovereignty. And find that developed countries will ignore these agreements because they want to develop their countries and they feel like they are superior, man. So we also have the principle of scientific uncertainty. There's much that is need to be done in the scientific field, and many nations have not been advanced scientifically, and there's that scientific uncertainty because there's that principle of prior informed consent. So this consent must be given on scientific basis and based on scientific evidence. So if you haven't advanced scientifically, you find it as a challenge in giving out that prior informed consent, and achieving that principle of multilateral environmental agreement of prior informed consent will be difficult. So I think I've talked enough on the multilateral environmental agreements. So the next question, you're going to talk about so we're going to talk about